such a journey, this, isn't it? Like 40 years of great records. So, I mean, what do you bring out of all that experience to Amyl and the Sniffers? Because what I've always really liked about your sounds is it's raw but very listenable, and but it never makes
Well,
anything sound any mainstream. And I don't imagine you're doing a straight rock and roll record with them. There will be a twist in this, won't there?
there will be a twist. Yeah, I mean it's amazing with them because they're so young. You know, they're in their 20s, and so they weren't born, you know, when punk happened, or even, you know, and they really, anybody who's seen them live will know, or even their records. I mean, it's just such a absolute honest, raw, incredibly exciting sound they have, that and the way they play is exactly like the bands I used to work with in the early 80s. It's the same. And yet, in some, they have listened to some of that music, but not as much as you might think. They've listened to, like, well, there's different members of the band, different listen to different things, as always with bands. But it just is extraordinary to me how their whole personality musically is like more like bands from the 70s, you know, late 70s. And so with them, it's very much like the same, well, it's the same approach as, say, recording the Bad Seeds or the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, or any kind of band that is a real, you know, band who writes their own songs, and they absolutely are the character of the music that they write, and also how they play. I mean, they're the same off stage as they are on, you know, same as the Bad Seeds, or, you know, it's so really I feel that it's really my job to capture it. That's what I'm doing. I'm It's more like if you're making a film, in film terms, it would be like I'm just being an incredibly good cameraman. And I'm setting things up, I'm setting up the lighting, I'm setting up everything so that I can capture everything, every feeling that's in the room. So, um, which is kind of what I've always done. Although back when I started, uh, I was really, really young. I mean, when I did like the Flowers of Romance, I was only 20 years old, and I was just doing what I felt, because I was I was going out to all the gigs. I'd seen Public Image. I clearly felt everything that they were doing, and so to me it was just natural to want to capture every little nuance, every eccentricity, and, you know, and in the same way, with Amyl and the Sniffers, there's so much there. I mean, Amy is just this extraordinary character. I mean, she's very amusing, and she writes incredible lyrics that are very, it's all about how she feels. You know, that's what she's writing about. She's writing about whatever she feels that day, or she wants to make some kind of, it's not like a political statement, but she's definitely touching on subjects uh, from a woman's perspective, in a great, great way. And I think in a way that hasn't quite been done that way before, because it's not kind of preachy. It's not that political. It's really just how she feels as a person, and the things she has to deal with. And so I have to, I feel it's very important for me to capture uh, what she's saying. Obviously, in other words, got to get the right microphone, the right sound on her voice. And but it's also a case of, like, the instrumentation around it. It has to really be in tune with what she's saying, which of course the band are, and that's why that band works. But you could easily fuck that up in the studio. You know, you could easily go in and, you know, get them to do it to a click, which I would never do with a band like that, or you know, or record all the instruments separately. So I wouldn't do that. So it's really like, it is like recording a live gig, but you're doing it in rooms that sound great. And you know, in their case, we did the most recent song, two songs that we did were done in LA, and we did them at Sunset Sound, which is a studio that was built in the late 70s, early 80s, and beautiful studio. I mean, it's all wood, and they've got a lot of vintage microphones, so it's perfect. You know, it just works. It was a no-brainer for me. That's the studio we got to go. And we went in there and bashed out, you know, the two songs in a day, which was great. And producing can be very much about like putting lots of bits together and making it work, or it can be about capturing this fantastic thing that's already there, but like capturing every nuance of it and then exaggerating that a lot. Then that's when usually in the mixing, that's when I get into that aspect of it. Like I'm pushing up guitars when they come in, I push them really loud and bring them back down again so that the vocal has its space, you know. So it's a lot of juggling.
Yeah, see, do you work with a lot of extremes then? That's interesting to talk about the guitar thing there. Because I always think when people talk about Raw Power and how that was a really badly produced record, I think it's one of the greatest produced records ever.
Yeah,
Because the guitar solos are
me too.
insanely loud and then they disappear again. And it's
Yeah.
it's it's like it's like the Alps, a dynamic Alps or something. Everything's really high and really low. And this, when I listen to stuff that you work on, these are dynamics you work in, aren't they? The things are really
Totally.
loud, then
Totally.
really quiet, and the exaggerations and the differences are what makes your style very distinctive.
Yeah, I mean, I think I went through a bit of a learning curve because I jumped in the deep end,
Yeah,
got
yeah.
got
What a
into the
place to
very deep
start.
end. You know, it's like the first year. I actually have a book. I don't have it here, but I have a little diary book. It's not like it hasn't got like I'm not writing down what happened each day, but it's just 1981, and it's like it says pill, 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 and then you know, then it's like actually no, it's before that. It was like uh it's pretty funny because it's like I'm assisting on a Phil Collins record, and then it's pill, 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 and then it's Kate Bush and Killing Joke, and then the Slits, and then the birthday. I mean, it's pretty crazy what happened that year for me. I don't know what was the universe was doing, but somehow you know, I just it just kept happening, and I didn't know what I was doing from a technical. I mean, I hadn't learnt much. I hadn't been taught much. It was all just gut feeling, and I made all those records, and then I learned how to do it. You know, as the years went on, and I learned and learned and it got to a point, I think, in the late '80s where I really knew what I was doing, and those records were shit. They were really not very good. They were overthought. It's just way too much thinking. Trying, I wasn't trying to be clever, but I was being too clever, and it kind of like I realized like I don't enjoy listening to these records that I've made you know in the late '80s, and then the whole grunge thing happened, and that was a bit, you know, it's kind of a similar thing to punk where it was like everything, you know, the big production, the long, you know, like spending 2 years in the studio doing a record. It was suddenly back to basics again. And I did work with a couple of bands. I was actually living in Australia at the time, so you know, ended up working with Silverchair, for instance, who was just three people, and they're really young, and it was very simple, and it was just extraordinary to me. And I was like, this is better. You know, this is it's funny because sometimes those records can take just as much effort as the you know, laying it up and, you know, doing lots of overdubs, but you just know it's right. There's something about it. So I did do this kind of thing of going, hang on. And I think from that point onwards, most most records I've done since I went back to basics in as far as not overcooking it have been better, and I can listen to them and I go, yeah, that works. It's all about the flow. It's all about the flow, and it's all about not confusing the listener. If you've got the listener in to your world that you want them to be in, which is obviously the band's world. Once you've got them in, you don't want to throw all this stuff at them that takes them out of that moment, because they're really enjoying that moment. That's really important. And I didn't understand that, I don't think. The bigger the budgets got, the more I was going extremes with production. And it's almost like the production was way overweighing what the band had naturally, which was probably good enough.
Yeah, I think a lot. I mean, a lot of your work over the years has created a sense of drama in the records, and I think. But another thing is, when we talk about this, we talk about capturing the moment to make it raw. It's kind of that, but also they're really well produced as well. When I listen to Flowers of Romance now, and I listen to it a lot as a record, it never dates, and it's actually a really beautifully sculpted record that also sounds really raw at the same time. It's a really difficult balance to get.
Yeah, it's a crazy record. I mean, I love it. I absolutely love that record.
It's amazing.
And I listen to it and I go kind of, because that was the first record I made, literally the first record. I mean, I did do another thing before it that was really popular, and it was a completely different type of record, but that was kind of like a remix.
Was that pop music?
Pop music.
Yeah. What was your role in that?
Really, it was just editing tape and tape loops and all this. So with pop music, what I was working in I managed to get a job in a recording studio, and what I thought was a recording studio, because I already knew when I was like 17 that I wanted to make records. I just really I loved the whole idea of all the, faders.
Not being in a band, because at 17 you're part of the punk generation, like we all are, and everybody wanted to be in a band, but you're thinking about being in a studio. That's unusual then, isn't it?
I think I was I was kind of shy. I was very geeky and well, it could be that, or I know I didn't want to get up on stage. I just did not. I was too shy to get up on stage, that's for sure. But also, I grew up in Spain, in the south of Spain. So all my schooling was in Spanish. And my family, we just happened to come back. We got kicked out of Spain, is what happened. Franco, who was the dictator then, he died. And then basically there was a king came in, and then the police basically went round to all the foreigners and was like, where's your papers? And we didn't have any papers because there was no papers to be had. We just moved to Spain and lived there. So my mum couldn't work. My dad was already in England, but my mum couldn't work. So we had to leave Spain. We came back to England in 1977, which was perfect because and I was 17, so I was just like went out to all the gigs, and my dad is a writer, wrote novels and books, and he did that all his life. He was quite successful. He got a job writing film scripts at Bray Film Studios, which is where Hammer horror movies were made. It's also where Star Wars and Alien and Rocky Horror Picture Show was made. It's a little film studio out near Windsor, and my dad got me a job there as a runner, and there was a recording studio there, and I used to sort of skive off and sit outside the studio just listening. And the owner was this guy called Adam, and he had long hair. He was kind of hippie looking guy, but they had, believe it or not, they had Throbbing Gristle were there. doing a record, and there's all these crazy noises. What's going on in there? It's amazing. And Adam came out, and I was sitting near the door, and he said, um, my dad's name's Drew, right? He says, here, you're a Drew's son, aren't you? He said, and I said, yeah, my name's Nick. And he said, come in, come in. And I just sat in on one of their sessions, and I saw all the meters and all the tape machines whirring and the crazy looking musicians. And I just loved it. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. And so then I kept looking, and I got a job at a studio called Tape One. And I thought it was a recording studio, but actually it was an editing room. So they had lots of tape machines, and it was a mastering room, or cutting room, as they were called in England. So I got given a little room, and I had 2 tape machines, and I would copy from one tape machine to the other. So this is before digital. And basically, if you put a record out back in those days, the only way to do it was you'd get the master. Obviously, there's one tape, and you don't want to send your master out because it's got lots of edits, and it can come apart, and it could get damaged. And so you do a copy. So you do a copy for each country. So I had to learn all about tape machines, all about speeds and biasing and azimuth and all this technical stuff. And that was actually great training. And I learned how to edit. And I got really good at editing, with a sticky tape and a razor blade. And this song comes in, unknown band. And it was kind of like a disco song, because I did like disco. I loved Chic, for instance, and I loved like Donna Summer, and I liked Earth, Wind and Fire. But really, I wasn't going to those gigs. I was going to the punk rock gigs. I mean, I probably saw every punk band. Probably saw you, and we were probably at the same gigs.
Probably,
and, probably. Oh, I'm more very, very likely. And yeah, so I was really into. I had spiky hair, and I was like a young geeky looking punk, But in comes this song, and it's basically got a disco beat and a really great sort of synth bass line that sounded like Kraftwerk. And then the singing was reminded me of Iggy Pop. It was kind of all Lou Reed. It sounded like cross between Lou Reed and Iggy Pop. And then it was this incredibly catchy backing vocals. And it was just this weird combination of a lot of things. And I thought, it's really good. And along on the tape, it had the single version, and it had an instrumental, which was unusual. And so one night I just copied it, and then I edited between the two, the instrumental and the normal, making it longer. And I rearranged the whole song. And then I made a tape loop of a part of it, and I fed that back through the desk and made it, sort of the phase was different on the left and the right. And all I was doing was being creative with what little equipment I had. And the mastering guy, a guy called Dennis Blackham, who's quite a famous mastering engineer. He was up late. He was working down the hallway mastering some records, and he was locking up. And he came in and said, "Oh, what? I didn't know you were here. What are you up to?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just doing this. I'm basically fucking around. I'm just doing this edit thing for myself of this new song." He said, "Oh, what song's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's called Pop Music." He said, "I know. Isn't it great?" He said, "I heard that." I said, He said, "We're mastering it tomorrow. The singer's coming in tomorrow." And he's some friend of Malcolm McLaren, and he's a very interesting guy, and coming in tomorrow. And I don't know what it is, but it's a great song. And he said, "Well, what have you been doing exactly?" And I said, "Well, I've done this thing." I said, "Play it." So I played it to Dennis, and he was like, "Oh my, this is incredible. This is really good." He said, "Do me a copy of it on another piece of tape, and I'll play it to him tomorrow." And I was like, "You can't do that. That's like I've just butchered this guy's song. We haven't even met the guy." And and Dennis said, no, it'll be fine. Don't worry. I've spoken to him on the phone. He's lovely. and it's really good. You know, I'll just play it to him. There's no reason behind it other than just a bit of fun. All right, well, you know, Dennis was kind of like my boss in a way, so I did it. Went home, and the next day, like middle of the afternoon, knock knock. You know, Dennis goes, "Are you busy?" And I said, "No, I've just finished this copying this." And he said, "Oh, I've got Robin Scott, the singer from M, was the name of the band, and I played him what you did, and he loves it. And he wants to meet you." So he comes in, and you know, he's got a blue suit on, just like in the music video,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
If you know the music video, I mean, he looks like Brian Ferry. He's kind of like Brian Ferry lookalike, right? So he comes in. He's just a lovely guy, but truly, you know, very elegant chap. And he just is gushing about this thing, and he said, "Oh, it's really good." And he said, I'd just been in New York with Malcolm McLaren, and we went to these clubs, and they're doing these 12, they're called 12-inch remixes because they're on 12-inch vinyl, and there hasn't been one in England. So I want to put the first 12-inch remix out in England, but no, it's going to be commercial. We're going to do it on pink vinyl, and I've got this whole idea, and I need a longer version, and you've just done it. So if you're okay with it, I'll use your version. And I was like, what's happening? You know, this is nuts,
Yeah.
you know? And so basically, you know, that's what happened. And you know, the single comes out and boom, it goes to number one. And then I think it was at number one in England, maybe number one, number two, something like that. You know, and they then put the 12-inch out. And that was a complete novelty. So the DJs loved it. You know, it was 5 minutes long. So it wasn't like, I mean, it was pushing it for radio, but this song was already a massive, massive hit. And it was a hit all over the world. So people played the 12-inch more in the end than the original. And that was that, you know, and that basically, when a job came up at the Townhouse, I went for the interview with a lot of other kids my age, and I got the job because I'd done that, because the chief engineer was very impressed by that.
I mean,
And
what was it? Was there any
so
inkling?
that's that all, you
I
know.
mean, was there any inkling of doing more kind of 12-inch remixes?
Well, I
Or
did.
just
I ended up, yeah. I mean, I did a lot of the 12-inch remixes for In Excess. I mean, I did an album. I produced an album for In Excess, but then when they got super big, you know, with the Kick album, I did most of the remixes for Kick, 12-inch remixes, and they're all like 6 or 7 minutes long. And
oh,
I did a lot of remixing, like when the 12-inch. You remember there was that period in the 80s where every single had to have a 12-inch.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
was very busy. I was doing a lot of remixes then.
But when you went to the Townhouse, it's more to be an assistant engineer.
Originally, yeah, I was like, well, more
Yeah,
like T-boy.
yeah, yeah.
But
And
what
this,
happened there was,
yeah,
yeah, I
this is
was
how, yeah, yeah.
I was there. I'd only been there like 2 months maybe, and I was the youngest guy there and least experienced and all that. And then there was a session for Public Image on the weekend, and none of the assistants wanted to do it because John had been obnoxious. I think that was the word, to them, and they didn't want to do it. And Public Image was signed to Virgin, to Richard Branson, and Richard Branson owned the Townhouse. So, you know, on the weekends, you tended to get the Virgin signed bands. And yeah, so I got put on that session. And then this whole thing happened, which is, I mean, I've told this story a lot, so I don't know if you want me to tell the story again,
Oh, it's
but
nice to have it.
basically,
Yeah,
yeah, so I was told, you know, as an assistant, you had to, back then, you had to sit at the back of the room and be quiet and just do what the engineer said, right? So the engineer said, "Oh, can you mic up this? Can you put the mics up for that? Or can you rewind the tape machine?" Whatever it was, that's what you did. And you didn't. not supposed to talk. So I was at the back of the room on a high chair kind of thing to operate the tape machine because it was really tall. And anyway, this engineer that John brought in was a kind of dub reggae kind of guy. He wasn't Jamaican, but he had dreadlocks and he talked with a Jamaican accent. But he really didn't look Jamaican to me. But anyway,
Yeah.
I don't even know the guy's name. I really don't know his name. But anyway, he came in and he just was not there. I mean, I don't know whether he was stoned or something, but he didn't understand how the desk worked. And it was an unusual desk because it was kind of a prototype SSL before SSL, which SSL became the most popular mixing desk, during the 80s and 90s. But this was like with a prototype, so it was weird. It did have a few things, but they were very simple. It's like he kept on saying, "Oh, this button doesn't work." He was trying to get the echo to work, and it's because I would go up and go, "Well, it's not the button. You pull the knob up, and that's the switch. Pulling the knob out, it clicks, and that's how you switch it on." And I go back to my place, and then you go, "Hey man, this one doesn't work either. There's something wrong." And I'll go, no, it's the same. They're all the same. Say all those 100 knobs, they're all the same. You pull them up to switch them on. And I go back. And then the third time, because he just wasn't grasping it. I did it. I explained it again. I said, "Look, pull it up." And John at this point, hadn't spoken to me, and he said, "Yeah, what's your name?" And I said, "It's Nick." And he said, "Well, Nick, for fuck's sake, get your chair and put it up near the desk. Going backwards and forwards like fucking yo-yo, and you're making me dizzy." So I was like, okay. So I took my chair and put it next to the engineer. And of course, I'm higher, and every time the engineer couldn't get it to work, I reached over and did it. So this happened for, a little bit. The engineer gets up to go and have a piss, leaves the room. John gets up. Right, first time he got up all day, the whole day, and locks the door. And he goes like, looks at me. He says, "All right, you know what you're doing. Sit in the big boy's chair and make it sound good." I'm like, "What?" Says, "Go on, you know what you're doing." And I sit down. I couldn't believe it, and I was like really confused by this because it goes against all the rules about being an assistant, And so I basically then started, and I was like, I know. I thought the snare needs to be this and the bass needs to be louder and lower. And, so I started doing all these things to the drums and that. And I paused and I turned around to John and he goes, "Why are you stopping?" And I said, "Well," I said, he's the engineer and I'm the assistant, and the assistant's not supposed to, I'm just worried about messing up what he did." And he goes, "He didn't fucking do anything." He said, "You've done more in the last 10 minutes than he's done all day."
Yeah.
Carry on, So that's what happened. And then the engineer came back, was banging on the door. John's ignoring him, eventually called, which was hilarious because the phone rang and I picked it up and the guys go, "Hey man, door's locked. Can you open the door?" And I'm like, John goes, "Is that him?" He says, "Hand it here." And he goes, "Hello, can I help you?" And we go, "Yeah, man, the door's locked." And he says, "Yeah, well, we're making music in here, which is more than you fucking know how to do. So fuck off home." Clunk. And that's it. That's what happened. And I ended up finishing that song. And that song was an outtake from Metal Box. And it came out as a 12-inch. It was what was it called?
Home is where the heart is.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Home is where the heart. Exactly. Yeah. And so it came out, and then the next thing I know is Virgin called the townhouse, and I got called to the manager's office, and the manager said, you know, the Jeremy Lascelles, I think it was, at Virgin, just called, and apparently John and John and Keith want you to, engineer the next Public Image record. And that's what happened. So I went in, I was basically the engineer, but because of circumstances that were going on, John at that time, he basically got into a fight in Ireland. He was picked on because of his looks, and a fight broke out in this pub, and someone got bottled, and the police arrived, and they all blamed him, and he ended up going to jail. And then he was allowed out, but there was this court case, and John told me all about this, and he really thought that he was going to go back to jail and he was going to get killed in jail. So this was going to be the last album. So he actually turned up every day and was very focused and just wanted to do stuff. Martin Atkins was the drummer, who was really young. I mean, he was the same, he was like 20 as well. And I'd learned how to get this drum sound in that room, which was a spectacular sounding drum room. I'd learned from Hugh Padgeham, who was the guy who, did the that drum sound. I knew how to get that drum sound right. So I just got that drum sound, and then Martin played what he played, like that Four Enclosed Walls thing, and and it was this fantastic beat, great big drum sound. John would come in and go like, what have you two clowns been up to? And we play him whatever me and Martin had done. For about 2 hours, we just messing around with just having fun. Not, I wouldn't say we weren't taking it seriously, but we were just killing time waiting for John and Keith to come in. So John would come in, and here we'd play him these beats. That's all they were, but they were really, really good beats. I mean, if you listen to that album, I mean, Under the House, for instance, is just incredible drumming. And so basically John would listen to it. He either loved it or hated it. And if he loved it, he just would say, let's listen to it again. He'd write the lyrics on the spot. And he'd go, have you got a microphone so I can wail? And out he'd go. And he'd just, Four Enclosed Walls is basically just a drum beat, right? It's just a drum beat and a vocal mostly. There's a few other things that come in. But that was an example of what I was just talking about. It was just this great hypnotic drum beat. And John loved it. And he went out and did that vocal, and I think we did 2 takes. Done. And then I had this idea of recording the piano backwards, and because I'd seen that, like Hugh had done that on some record, and I thought that's really cool sound. So I put the tape upside down, played the song backwards, and John just went, gong, gong, gong. Or maybe Keith played the piano. I can't remember who did it. There was one or the other. And then I moved it so it would go and fall on, because I knew how to do that, from my time in the other editing studio. I'd basically take the piano off, and then I'd start the tape machines and put it back on. And so I did a lot of tape trickery, I suppose. And I guess in the end, what happened is the album got done,
what a great place to start, to make what was your first album, and to be allowed that kind of creative carte blanche that you had at that point. And to the point where, because they're not really a band, are they? They're like a project, and you kind of get involved as part of that project, don't you? More than all the lines are very blurred, aren't they, between producer, engineer, musician, creative.
Especially that at that time. At that time, Wobble had left or had been kicked out. We're not sure, but so it really was just, John and Keith and of course Martin Atkins. I think it was the first record that Martin Atkins made. Like he hadn't been in the studio, and because I mean, I'm friends with everybody. I mean, I was very sad when Keith passed away, but I kept in touch with Keith, and I kept in touch with John. I'm very in touch with John because he lives in LA. And Martin lives in Chicago, and I see Martin's on the interwebs a lot on Facebook and stuff. So he often posts things, or I post things, we comment. So we've met up a few times and talked about how crazy that was, because we're the same age. And he told me it was like that was his first experience really recording, like. And I said, well, mine too. And, we had nothing to compare it with. And, maybe that's why it's such a magical record. It's interesting. It is interesting because it is very, the Kate Bush album, The Dreaming, which was done shortly after in the same exact room. That album has a similarity to it in that it was the first time Kate Bush was producing herself. She'd already done 2 albums that were, proper big productions. And I was the engineer on The Dreaming, and that was very much like 2 kids going nuts every day with, her imagination, of course, was off the hook. She's like in a different fairy tale every day. And it was just so much fun because she would come in and go, I've got this song and it's all about this, and she'd explain it, and it would just be this world. And of course, her huge eyes and the whole thing that Kate Bush is. And and then it would be like, it wasn't like doing a record. It was like building a stage for a theater piece, or making a movie. And so everything was like lots of reverb or no reverb, or like effects that went from side to side. It was all this stuff of like, well, just experimenting. And so that album, The Dreaming, would not have been that album if I'd had more experience, and or perhaps if she'd had more experience. She definitely had more experience making records than I did. But again, similar age, me and her similar age. So and no endless budget. It's crazy.
So it's a very interesting way of working this. I mean, would it be your role there? And obviously, you have the technical skills as an engineer. And would you be facilitating their kind of unique visions, or are you both kind of fumbling around trying to find this unique vision? Say with Kate Bush, say with John Lydon, because I get the feeling with that PiL album that, I mean, John's obviously completely brilliant, especially that time, but he probably didn't really know where that record was going to end up. But he had a vision to do something that was completely different, and that was it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, because I had a lot of time chatting with Keith about it, and he was insistent, and he did this in the press too, that it was not a band. It was an idea. So it was very much like, because I don't think I was nervous, but I was aware that I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't had any training, so I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. But because he said that, Keith told me that the reason I was doing the record was because I was doing things different to anybody they'd worked with. And John and Keith, they liked what I did on that mix because it was weird. And so that gave me a lot of confidence. It was like, oh, so there are no rules. Not that I know what the rules are, but there are no rules, so we can do anything. It's not going to be a punk record, for instance. Like that was definitely, it's not a punk record. It's not a rock record. It's not going to have guitar riffs, you know. It's just going to be the stuff. And you know, I had listened to Captain Beefheart, and I had listened to some, you know, again, I grew up in Spain. So I'd listened to a lot of sort of gypsy music from the south of Spain. Like you could say flamenco, but it's not really. It's not what the commercial flamenco. This is really. It's all about the clapping, which if you
It's
listen to
it's amazing
Under the House,
music.
that's what that is. That's exactly what that is. Because his drum part was to me, I was like, it should have these claps that go left and right, go. So, you know, we went out there and did this claps like bat 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 bat, and then I put a delay, so it's decka 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 decka. And there's a couple of times on that song where I mute everything and it just goes to the claps. And that's completely, you know, to do with me growing up with these gypsies in Spain. You know, again, not touristy. We're not talking touristy. We're talking about really, really poor people who live in caves and stuff, you know, and they just do this very heartfelt kind of thing, and they're playing guitar, but they're not really. It's a percussion instrument, and they're hitting it. It's not like dun. It's not Gypsy Kings, you know. It's not Gypsy Kings.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think a lot of when Keith is going on about, you know, it being sort of like trying to come up with new sounds that have never been heard, that was like, thank God, because I don't know how to get normal sounds. So,
Yeah.
and it's like, you know, that song, I might have the name wrong. Is it Flanagan? It
Oh yeah,
starts off with
yeah.
it goes boom, right? What that is, it's a banjo that was just propped up against the wall, and then someone played. There was a bass amp right near it, and someone picked up the bass and played a note, and it made the banjo vibrate like over the top. And I heard it because it was in the drum room, and the drum room amplifies everything. It's like a very loud stone room. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a good sound. I'll do that again. So we just did that. So it's a boom. And that I probably did that because Keith saying weird, you know, do strange things. And then of course John with his lyrics and his want to, there wasn't a lot of communication between John and Keith, but they were on the same page. You know, I mean, Keith, I didn't know because I was too young to know what was going on, but he was disappearing a lot to
Yeah.
do the stuff,
Yeah.
do the gear, you know, and that was definitely odd because he'd come in, play something brilliant, disappear, and I thought he was coming back, and he didn't come back, and then he'd come back the next day, and we'd hear what he'd done. He wanted to hear what he did the day before, and he hated it, and told me to erase it, and I never did. I never erased it. I was just like, I'm not. I would just, you know, I'd say I raised it, and then another time he'd come back in and say, you know that thing I played a few days ago? And in my head, I was like, yeah, he's talking about the thing he told me to erase. So I'll play it to him. And I thought this could be really risky because I'll put it up and he'll go, no, I told you to erase that. But he didn't because he didn't know what day it was, you know? So there's a lot of that on the album. There's a lot of things that, you know, it's weird. It's just a weird thing. That whole chemistry of who they were at that time, what they were going through, what I was, not that I was going through anything, but my thing. I mean, I was still living at home with my mum, you know, with my brother. Um, yeah, it's a special record. It's a really, really special record.
I mean, what I also really love about that record is there's so much space in it. It's actually quite minimalistic. There's a lot of
Yeah.
extreme sounds that somehow hold together the songs and work. But it must have been very tempting to just chuck the kitchen sink in there, literally, because that would have sounded good. But there's actually so
Well,
much space.
that song, uh, what's it called? Oh, there's one chaotic song.
Oh yeah, another drum beat.
One of the most horrific horror movies ever made. A Chainsaw Massacre. What that
Yeah,
song is.
yeah.
It's Chainsaw Massacre. We put Chainsaw Massacre. We had a video of it. We put it on the TV and just hit everything, like played everything randomly. And that's what that, it's just, it's not really a song, it's just chaos. But if you watch the movie and listen to that song, it's extraordinary.
It captures the atmosphere.
It really is that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you worked with Kate Bush, did she work with you because she really liked the sound of Flowers of Romance and wanted to, or the vision of it, maybe?
In a way, but the way it happened was Hugh Padgeham, who was the guy I learnt from, great, incredible engineer, incredible recording engineer, he and producer. So he worked a lot with Steve Lilywhite. So there was a couple of albums, there was two XTC albums that were produced by Steve Lilywhite that Hugh engineered, and I worked on Black Sea, which is, I think, a great record.
Oh, it was one of the great records of that period, and again, incredible drum sounds and an incredible drummer.
Well, that's Hugh. So that's Hugh Padgeham, right? And Hugh had also had engineered the Peter Gabriel's third record, the one that has Intruder, which unbelievable. That track is extraordinary. I mean, is that I heard that in that room because when I first started at the Townhouse, they had a playback party. So I didn't work on that record at all, but I was there for the playback party, and I was just in the room when they played it back for people. Peter was there, and Hugh and Steve were there. They were just playing the whole album back, and I was just like, oh my God, I've never heard anything so good. So then I got to work with Hugh, and he kind of got that same sound for Phil Collins, because Phil Collins played that drum part, you see, and that's why Phil Collins got Hugh to produce his record, because he wanted that drum sound. And Kate Bush sang on that record. She sings on two songs. There's Games Without Frontiers and what's the other one? Another one. So that was that. And then Hugh started doing the Kate Bush album as an engineer. And they did a couple of songs. And then Hugh got asked to produce The Police. So, of course, anybody in his position is like, hang on, Police, one of the biggest bands in the world, and he's being asked to produce them. Whereas Kate just wanted him to engineer. It's nothing to do with money. It's to do with, hang on, this is a career-changing thing to produce The Police. And of course, Hugh went on to do, I think, 3 albums with The Police that were huge hits. So
yeah.
So he was like, oh, and what am I going to do? He didn't want to let Kate down. He felt bad about it. And he had heard the Flowers of Romance, and he saw that I could get those sounds. Right. So he said, hey, can you do me a copy of that album that you did? I'm going to play it to Kate Bush, because I'm going to try and get her to get you to engineer it, because I can't do it. I've got to go off and do this band. And he didn't tell me at the time who it was. And so that's what happened. And Kate heard it and loved the Flowers of Romance, thought it was great. And within a week, she was, came through the studio door. I was there, and off we went, you know. So that's how that happened.
Yeah, so it's a really brilliant
Incredible.
combination because it kind of brings her into that kind of space, that kind of weird post-punk space where people were definitely pushing the sonic limits, weren't they? And it was, I mean, an artist like Kate Bush could have gone very mainstream and very Fleetwood Mac, that
Yeah.
kind of direction, which is probably what the record label would have wanted. But the idea that she's interested in working with a guy just done this really extreme record,
I
it's
know.
quite mind-boggling.
You know, I haven't, you know, unfortunately, I haven't seen her since I did that record because she became very reclusive and, you know, she built her own studio. And, you know, I'd love to catch up with her and get her take on what she thought. I mean, I did, I would say three-quarters of that album. I recorded three-quarters of that album. And then she went and took it to her studio and then spent another year doing all the not all the vocals, but a lot of the vocals and backing vocals. And so she did a lot of more overdubs. But when I listened to the final thing, it wasn't, I've got rough mixes and it's not that, you know, I mean, she did some amazing stuff, obviously, but it's like the, the main tracks are all done at the Townhouse. And, yeah, it'd be very interesting to hear, hear what she thinks of that
I
record now.
think it probably
I mean, it's a
remains
very
a
strange
mystery.
record.
It's a
I
great
love that
record.
record.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it does tie up a lot of different worlds into one space. I mean, I like this intersection between Kate Bush, Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins, PiL, you, and the other people that start to come in on into the picture now because you start working people like the Birthday Party, Gang of Four. So all those bands sort of hurtling out of post punk, trying to find a new kind of template, really. How do you make something that sounds as intense and as thrilling as punk, but in a completely different kind of way, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, now, of course, I mean, recently, I got to work with the Idols, you know, and that was so much fun because, you know, clearly to me at least, they were influenced by Gang of Four. That's what I thought. I mean, they might be influenced by a lot of things, but it's like when they asked me to work on it. I mean, I did some mixes for the Joy album, um, and I worked really, you know, I did a lot of distortion and I changed the things a lot on that, and they loved it, and that's why I got asked to do the next record, you know, which was Ultra Mono, which I also did with Adam Greenspan or Atom, who had been my he'd been my assistant, then my engineer, and we worked really well together. And he started producing, so I thought, and he did. So he mixed a lot of Joy as well. So then we worked on that together, and that was great. You know, we did that in France in a studio called La Frette, which is near Paris. It's about an hour north of Paris, and that was great. You know, that really felt like similar. It had a similar feeling to working at the Townhouse on all those things in 1981. You know,
Because of yeah, the live room sounds.
yeah,
I mean, I definitely when I
exactly.
hit
Yeah, well,
yeah, on those Idols records, I can hear that sort of early '80s drum sound. To me, actually, I mean, they actually might be more the Birthday Party without being as
right.
intense and chaotic. But well, it's definitely more on that kind of corner to me. But with everybody playing huge sounds all at once, but again, the skill of what you do there is it doesn't collapse into complete mess and chaos, and somehow sonically everybody finds a space, and I think that's probably your real skill here.
Yeah, it's like you got to capture the chaos, and then you've got to work out how to mix it in a way that it's not unlistenable. You know, I mean, a lot of the Bad Seed stuff um, is quite chaotic in the way that it's done because it's, you know, Nick comes in with the songs and no one else has heard them. No one else. Like he basically, not all the records, but I did quite a few. I think I did 8 records altogether, including the Grinderman records, and most of those records had a sort of pattern whereby the studio, I'd get booked, the studio would get booked. I'd usually pick the studio, I'd find a studio and I'd suggest it. And if Nick liked the idea of going to the south of France or whatever, where Push the Skyway was done at a studio called Fabrique, which is a fantastic building. It's just great. But yeah, so well, the way that would work is because there's 7 people in the band and there's no real rehearsing or demoing. I mean, there's a couple of songs where they had a go at demoing, but for the most part, no. And everybody lives in different countries. They all fly in. So what I'd do is I'd get there a day or 2 early before Nick, without Nick knowing. And this was an agreement that I had with everybody. Because as soon as Nick walks through the door, he's so impatient. I mean, he's changed a lot. He's become quite a different person in recent years. But back then, he was just the most impatient person on the planet. So as soon as he walks in, he wants to. He goes to the piano and starts playing, and you're off. There's no kind of talk about what we're going to do. It's just bang, and it's really funny actually. And so I'd go in a day or 2 before, and I'd make sure the drummers, Jim and Tommy would come with their drum kits would arrive. We'd get the drum sounds, and then we get a few different, like get Warren's sound, or get as many sounds as we can, and to have other instruments plugged up just in case, like there'll be a Rhodes. So it's lots and lots of channels, lots of outboard EQ, lots of mic pre's. Like, those records were made in 4 days, very intense 4 days.
Wow. Yeah.
But the budget, it wasn't going to cost a lot because it's only a few days, right? But the budget was spent on mic pre's and microphones and just the insane amount of setup. And then everybody's basically there. Nick arrives thinking it's day 1,
Yeah.
He has no concept that we've spent a couple of days setting this up. And he'd go, right, is everybody here? And go up to the piano and he'd go, dun, and he goes, okay, this song goes like, dun, dun. And then there's this bit, then I sing this bit, and then it goes to that. And then, all right, you ready? It literally, that's it. And everybody goes, what? And they go, well, it's the second chord. And he goes, what? And he goes, that one. And I go, right. And then off they go. And the first take is just chaos. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's chaotic, and it's people like missing the chorus comes in and people haven't changed. It's all that. Second take, amazing, because they're amazing musicians and they're sort of tuned in. They're tuned into him, and it's this incredible harmony that happens in the studio with them. It's like they're all the telepathy, and obviously he's picked these musicians because their aesthetics are close to his, so it all works. It's a fantastically well-oiled machine, even though no one's put the oil in,
Yeah.
And off they go, and then they'll do the third take, maybe. Second take is usually close, and I would often, I'm on the other side of the glass, and I'm like, and Nick will go, right, that's that one. I've got this other one. And I go, hang on. Can you just do one more? And go, why? Why? And I'll go, well, and it might be because the tempo is a bit slow, right? So I'll say, and I learned this very quick. Whatever I say has to be fucking on. It has to be real, and it has to be no bullshit, because if I'm wrong, he'll never listen to me again. It's like my opinion just is not an opinion. So like I do remember certainly the first, what was the first album I did was Nocturama,
Nocturama. Yeah.
which is quite slow, right? Most of the songs are quite slow. And I thought it was very slow because it was, for me, it was a very slow record. And I said, oh, well, I think it'd be good to just speed it up again. And he goes, why? I go, well, because it just sounds a bit slow. And he goes, what, you've been working fucking, LA punk bands or something? And he says, what's that horrible LA punk band? And Warren's going, what do you mean? And he goes, what, Red Hot Chili Peppers? He said, yeah, have you been working with the Red Hot Chili Peppers? He'd never listened to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, right? So, that came back to bite him, I think, because he became really good friends with Flea and stuff. And it's like, no, he didn't really mean, he just meant those bands, Anyway, so I go, no, I haven't. And he said, well, why then? Why do you want it faster? And I said, well, and I just said, because it sounds like a bunch of old men playing. And he was like, really? He says, hang on, let's go and have a listen. Like, as in, I'm like, fuck, and they're all coming in, Blixer, and they're all coming in, and they're like intense. And I'm like, Jesus, I hope that, I'd play it. And with it halfway through the verse, Nick goes, yep, sounds like, anyway, let's speed it up. So, and that's how he had a little bit, at least, confidence in my opinion, and so on. And that's, and then, obviously having lived in Australia, I know the Australian sense of humor and the constant piss taking, and it's all part of it, because with Nick and Warren and Mick Harvey, it's just like that all day long. It really is. And you have to deliver it back, because if you don't deliver it back, you're not part of their thing. And
is that important as your role to actually, you joined the band virtually when you were at work with them?
You kind of do, especially with a band like that. You really do. I mean, and you end up wearing suits and nice shoes, which is good.
Was a plus, yeah. I mean, so the performance is obviously really important in the studio, but also the mix afterwards. And if you get a great performance, how much mixing is there afterwards? How much is, what's the proportion? Is it 50-50, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's definitely 50-50. I mean,
yeah.
I tend to spend longer mixing than I do recording, because the recording is all about the setup. It's all about setting it up. So you've got amps in different rooms. You get as much separation as possible, but all the people in the band are all in the same room looking at each other. So it feels very organic, and everybody's feeding off each other's mood. And so you capture that, but the sounds the bleed between the instruments is usually really good. Really, like, there's not much bleed. So when I come to mixing, I can do a lot. And I'll spend quite a bit of time mixing and getting it to sound great. I add a lot of distortion. Distortion is probably the biggest tool I use with mixing. I mean, I send.
Is that overloading it through the VUs and things like that? Like,
yeah, and I put kick drums. Yeah. I put kick drums through guitar distortion pedals and stuff like that. I do quite a lot of that, and I just lots of delays, like slap echoes. A lot of I usually have 2 Echoplex or Roland, tape echoes going. I mean, these days I mix in Pro Tools in the box, because of the budgets don't allow me to go and mix in a studio anymore, which is sad, really. But that said, Pro Tools has got so good, and you've got this company called UAD that has replicated all the analog equipment so incredibly well, and it looks, you get a picture of the actual thing, and it's amazing.
Oh yeah,
it took me a little while.
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean,
I resisted digital for a long time. I insisted on doing everything to tape, and I didn't want a computer anywhere near me. But after a while, there just wasn't the budget. You know, it really was to do once Spotify, you know, crept in, and basically all the record sales went out out the window. I had to learn how to use Pro Tools really well, and so now that's what I do. You know, I still record though in the analog studios, and I do all the recording in quite expensive studios like Sunset Sound, or like, you know, Fabrique, or these kind of places, and then do the overdubs very often in my house. You know, I do as much of it basically where it's free, in order to make the record that we want with the budget. So
it's interesting.
that's where we're at now.
It's interesting you use a lot of effects in it, because, you know, the other, you know, great post-punk engineer stroke producer, Steve Albini, who makes them, you know, when it can make amazingly sound raw records that have a lot of clarity and space to them. But a lot of it's in the recording techniques. He just records it, you know, all the mics,
Yes.
etc. But you're actually, and he doesn't really use a lot of effects, but use a lot of effects to create. It's not a similar sound, but similar kind of feel. You know, that balance between rawness and clarity.
I think. I mean, I haven't spoken with him, but I listen to his records, and I do think he has a very similar thing about the room mics. Like, recording the room sound is what I'm doing, and that's what he's doing. So we're picking studios that have great room sounds, great, you know, the rooms themselves have a lot of character. They're not dead recording rooms. They're quite the opposite. And he does definitely use echoes, like tape echoes and stuff like that, more than reverbs, and I do that as well. So there is a very similar, we have a similar aesthetic when it comes to that. I would say that probably I mix things, you know, I'd probably go a bit crazier with the mixing stuff. Yeah, but it depends on the record, though. It really depends on the record. A lot of records I've done are very simply. I mean, the Grinderman stuff is, you know, there's echoes and stuff, but there isn't really a lot of it's very raw. There's a lot of kind of crazy distortion and compression, which Steve Albini does as well. So
is it often just, you know, when you listen to track, it's what you hear and you think you're trying to get to a place, and if that effect gets you to that place, then it comes in? Or is it just kind of like with the Flowers of Romance record, just trying everything to see what does sound good, and when it does sound good, then you.
I mean, you know, after well, with Flowers of Romance, of course, I'd learned very quickly to get that drum sound and those sounds from Hugh, which again is all overloading the desk and distortion and compression and gating. So that's kind of unusual. I mean, that's not what most people do, but I was really fortunate that I got to witness Hugh doing it, and I was paying a lot of attention, and I was like, oh, it's actually kind of simple, but it's not what most people would do. But on the other hand, I'd never watched other people. I didn't really have to do much. I mean, I worked a bit did a couple of assisting with the Jam, for instance. But the Jam's records are all very dry. They're very like the Beatles. You know, it's dry, close, quite rich sounding. There's none of this recording the room and compressing it and distorting it. That's how those records sound. They basically sound like the Beatles. So, but I did witness that, and I thought, well, that's great, but I preferred what Hugh was doing because it was weirder and perhaps more drastic, you know. So, and I haven't really. I mean, I'm still using the same methods now that I did back then, probably because the bands that approach me to make the records are influenced by those records back then. So I know what they, you know, especially like you know, Idols and these, you know, Amyl and the Sniffers probably not so much, because I don't think they really knew what records I've made before. But I just that's what I'm doing. I'm channeling what I remember the feeling was of doing those punk records, all those post-punk records.
I mean, you've worked with amazing people, and it's an incredible list when you look at it all written down. But are the people you wish you worked with? Like, David Bowie must be in there. Someone like that mustn't, you know.
Oh, I would have loved to work with Bowie. There was a rumor going around London that I was working with him. And actually, it was Hugh. Hugh was working with them. You remember that one album, After Let's Dance, that one record, that Hugh produced it. And people thought and in fact, it's quite funny because, when so I'd done Public Image, uh, Birthday Party, and there was one other band I worked with. I can't remember who it
Killing
was.
Joke.
Killing Joke. Yeah, and then I got the Bowie thing. And at the time, there was these rumors that Bowie was doing Smack. I don't know if it was true or not. And because I was so thin and gaunt looking, which was because I was working crazy hours and not sleeping and not eating. I mean, I'm a very thin person anyway, but people thought that I was basically doing heroin. And they thought, oh, that's why Bowie's working with Nick Launay, because, they're on the same drug. And it was just like, people coming up to me and going, fucking hell, you got the gig, it's amazing you got the gig. And I was like, what gig? Oh, Bowie, yeah, we know why. We know why. I was like, what are you talking about? I was completely innocent to it all. I didn't know that any of these bands were doing that stuff.
Mm.
I really didn't. I, like I said, grew up in Spain where that stuff didn't exist back then, and then just ended up in the studio with these bands, and so that was quite funny that people thought I was working with. I wish again, wish I would had. I have worked with Iggy Pop though. I always wanted to work with Iggy Pop, and I did this song with Iggy that's coming out in the next few months. Had a great time. Yeah, it's a song that was actually recorded a little time ago. COVID kind of got in the way, but it's Anna Calvi. I did an album with Anna Calvi, who's amazing. I did this album called Hunter, which came out about 4 years ago, something like that. And just towards the end of mixing it, she asked me if I knew Iggy Pop. And I said, well, yeah, I do know it. I do know him. I said, I don't know him like really well. I don't have his number kind of thing, but I'd been backstage a few times and met him. He's always very, very nice, very lovely. I met him through Nick Cave when a Grinder Man were doing a gig. Actually, I think it was in Australia at the Big Day Out, and he was playing, and and then the Larry, the drummer from Iggy's band, ended up joining the band. See, so there's all this kind of stuff. Anyway, and so she told me this crazy story that she'd done. I think it was Glastonbury or something. And while she was out there playing, she looks around and Iggy's just side of stage, holding on to something. And he stayed there for the whole gig. And then she's quite shy, quite a shy person, quite a quiet person. I mean, she's got a confidence, but she's quite a quiet person. But then she had to walk past him because she loves Bowie and Iggy and Lou Reed and all that, all the same stuff that we love. And so she has to walk past him, and she's walking right at him. And he says, hey, I really like your music, and stuff. And she, oh, I really like your music. It's this, crazy conversation she tells me about. And he said, well, maybe we should do something. And she goes, well, maybe we should do a song. It's just, but the first thing comes to my mind. And you'd go, that'd be great, but I don't really write. I always write with people and stuff. And she goes, oh, I'll write you a song. you know, and he goes, well, that'd be great. And off he goes, you know, he said, I got to go and warm up. So she's left with this for like a couple of years, you know. And well, I think it was probably, this was now 2 years later, something like that. And she's telling me this story. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. And she said, well, I've just written the song while you've been mixing. I've been sitting back here and it just came to me and I've written this song. And I said, well, that's great. I said, what do you want to demo it? So basically she ended up flying, that was in LA. She went back to London. She recorded a demo of it kind of thing, but it was really good what she did. So then she sent it to me. I played around with it, made it sound bigger and did a bit of an overdubble too. And it's her singing. It's this incredibly good song. I mean, it's a wicked, and sent it to him and he loved it, absolutely loved it. And then it became this thing of how are we going to do this? And he didn't want to come to LA. And, you know, anyway, I ended up suggesting, there's a long story behind this, which is quite a funny story, but it ends up being like this. I ended up going to this gig. He was a little on the fence about the whole thing, but you know, because he'd done a couple of these kind of collaborations and they hadn't turned out very good. But he really liked this song. Anyway, I ended up meeting him, and this hilarious thing happened where he's just gone off stage, he's completely sweating, you know, and he's got towels on him. And I hadn't had a chance to speak to him before. So Henry, his manager, says, go in there now, you know, and talk to him now because we're going to take off. You know, we're just going to get in the car and go. He's finished the gig. He doesn't hang around. I go in there, and all I can see in this sort of tour bus thing is I can see it's him, but it's just these towels, white towels, and I know he's underneath the towels. But I'm like, I'm not going to go up and tap on his shoulder, right? I'm not going to do that. That'd be really rude. He'll be like really startled. So I just sort of like stayed in the bus, and I saw his wife Nina, who I knew, and I thought I'll go and talk to her until he, you know, stands up or something like that. So anyway, then somehow this board creaks on the floor, and he's like startled, and he goes up and he goes, "Hey, Nick, is that you? Come over here. I want to talk about this song." So I sit down opposite him. He's got these towels, right? And he says, "So I really like this song. And Henry tells me you're okay to come to Miami." And I go, "Yeah." You know, I said, "Look, it's just a microphone and a laptop. We can do it anyway. We can do it on the beach if you want." And he started laughing. He said, "No, I got a better idea. I got this second house. It's near a river, and there's alligators in there, and I can sing to the alligators." And I go, "That sounds great." And he goes, "You know what? I got this African chair, and I've had it for years. And when I sit in this African chair, I sing better." And he says, and I said, "Well, is the African chair in the same house?" He said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well," I said, "Well, we can put the African chair out on the veranda," because he told me there's a veranda thing, "and you can sing to the alligators sitting in the African chair." And he just says, "We're going to have a lot of fun." And he gives me this high five, and he's laughing. So the whole time he was talking with me, he was naked, completely naked. And I was just like, oh, this is just insane. Like basically, he'd probably just gone in and had a shower. He's sitting there naked, all these towels on. So come over here. So I'm facing Iggy Pop naked, and he's telling me about singing to alligators on this African chair, which I'm imagining is this voodoo thing with skulls and stuff. And anyway, I ended up going to Miami to this house, and I set it all up. I find the African chair, which is actually just a wicker chair that happens.
Yeah.
It was is a bit crooked, but you know he's got that bad hip, so when he sits in it, somehow he sings great. Anyway, put it out on the veranda. Sure enough, there were iguanas in his backyard, in his
How
garden.
perfect.
There's just many big ones. They weren't alligators, but they're iguanas. The whole thing was ridiculous. And then I hear the song, you know, coming from somewhere, like the neighbor. I couldn't work out why Anna's song was blaring. And I said to Henry, I said, what's going on? He said, that's the song, isn't it? And I said, yeah. I said, well, where is it coming from? I'm not playing it. He said, oh, it's probably Iggy's probably just arrived. He's got a convertible car. We go out and there's this huge silver convertible Rolls Royce with white leather interior. It's one of these new modern Rolls Royces that the hip hop guys have, you know. And he's in the car and he's singing it. You know, he's going and he's loving it. And I go up to him, I'm laughing already, and I see him, and he said, "Hey Nick, I'm really glad you're here because I fucking love this song." And I said, "Well, I fucking love your car." And he said, "I know, right? I call it my transsexual ghetto machine." It was just like he is, you know, I just love the guy. He is so him. And then came vocal, and the vocal is incredible. The song's incredible, and it's gonna come out in the next couple of months.
I want to hear it,
It's
see if it
really
matches up
good.
the image of it.
Yeah, no, it honestly, when you hear it, it's a great drum beat. It's I had to say it's to me it sounds like what you want to hear from Iggy. You know, it's really well written for him, and Anna sings on. They both sing on it, sometimes separate and sometimes together. It's just and the whole song is incredible. What it's about is really, really, really great. It's called God's Lonely Man, and
Oh, nice
it's
title.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's great.
So, well, I don't think we can top that anecdote. So, well, thanks for your time, Nick. That was brilliant.